Well, it's been a while, nearly a year, since I've dedicated an episode to some Skinwalker sightings. So here we go, narrating stories about one of the creepiest monsters discussed on the internet. An entity of Native American folklore, the Skinwalker is a scary subject. Some say simply talking about them calls them closer to you. Let's tempt fate by diving into these allegedly real sightings of Skinwalkers. Remember to share your story with us at darkstories.org and follow the Darkness Prevails podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Now, let's begin. The Buffalo and Wind. From Anonymous. I was 17 years old, just graduated from high school. It was the beginning of July, and it was getting hot. There were 4 of us who all decided that we were going to be there for a dear friend of ours. We were Amber, Ryan, Spencer, and myself. This friend was the pillar of our little clique, a kind and gentle guy who was a mountain of a man. He was also Native American. His mother was flying us all out to, I think, Missouri. His name was Kyle. His mother was taking us all out there because Kyle was becoming a man in the tribe. The elder or chief was giving him an animal spirit name. We arrived early in the day. Well, early for me anyway. So I was basically carried around by Kyle while I was half awake. For clarity, I'm about 5'3". I also don't weigh much. We met up with his mother at the airport, at which point we began the long drive to the reservation. I'm sorry I can't remember the name of the place or anything like that. I was nursing a hangover. When we arrived, there was a small hotel just outside of the reservation that we checked into. Amber and I got our own rooms, and the boys were bunking together. I went back to sleep when we got there, and I didn't wake back up until about 3 p.m., at which point I ate, washed up a bit, then got dressed. After being teased for a while about being so tired, we headed into the reservation. All of us got to meet many of Cheryl's friends, which was Kyle's mother. Then before we knew it, we were hanging out with some of the kids our age and a little older. We walked a bit further than I realized, from the buildings and outcroppings of where we first arrived. The sun was beginning to set. By then, we had been walking around and goofing off all day. The boys, trying to show off, started a fire, where we all sat and continued talking. Now to clarify a bit more, I am mute, so Kyle was interpreting for me. He was my best friend after all. Well, as the sun was almost set, we began to drink. Kyle, who's usually not much of a drinker, was hamming gulps from the bottles we had been passing around. Fast forward about 4 hours. We were fairly intoxicated. I lit up a cigarette and was enjoying the night, lying on my back and staring up at the sky. It was beautiful, enjoying a moment that was about to be ruined. All of a sudden, there was a hand on my stomach, going upwards towards my chest. I looked down to see one of the guys I didn't know making a little more than a pass at me. I went to jump back out of his reach when Kyle, who must have been watching me like a hawk, was on the guy and lands a right hook to his jaw. He flew off of me and onto the ground. At this point, the entire group is up on their feet, arguing and questioning what happened. Kyle explained everything. The boys then split up into 2 groups. Those who believed the guy who had been punched, and the others who believed Kyle. The chief's son was one of the boys with us. So then another argument broke out. The guy who had been punched threatened that because of what Kyle had done, he was going to summon evil spirits to come for all of us. He and the others who had sided with him left back toward the buildings. The rest of us sat back down, and some apologies were made. Soon the bottles came back out. The chief's son had some homemade stuff, and it was delicious. So I looked at him and asked about what kind of evil spirits the hands guy had mentioned. I'll be referring to the guy that got punched as Hans guy from here on out. At that question, everyone went quiet when Kyle had interpreted it for me. The chief's son, his name was Cody, I think, began telling us about some of the evil things that the Native Americans believed existed. He said that a favorite pastime of the Hans one was summoning skinwalkers. So by now it was closing in on 11 from what my watch was telling me. I was fading fast. The boys were all telling creepy stories now, a lot of them dealing with skinwalkers. Then all of a sudden, the human pillow known as Kyle stood to attention. This jarred me because he took me with him. I was on my feet before I knew what happened. The next 5 minutes felt like time had stood still. There in the woodline, no more than 200 feet from where we were standing, was this person on stilts. He was tall, skinny. All I could make out was that it had long arms with very large hands. My eyesight began to come back to me. The arms were very thin, but the claws were huge. Its chest was a very pale color, with skin that looked as if it had been stretched to the point it was going to rip. The head was that of a deer, like some deer skull you would see on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere with a cactus next to it. The eyes were the scariest part. They were moving around, eyeing each of us as if to size us all up. Kyle pushed me behind him. The last thing I could see were its eyes shifting toward me and him. He began shouting at it. This was out of character for him. He was threatening to rip it to shreds piece by piece, then burn whatever was left to cinders if it didn't leave us. Kyle was about 6 feet, played football and hockey. He was a very large man and well-toned. Every vein and muscle in his body was pumped up. His hair was standing on end as he walked to the right of the fire. As they looked each other in the eyes, Kyle decided to taunt it again. He mocked it, telling it that it was not going to see the sunrise. To our surprise, the horrific thing walked out of the clearing. And it didn't make a sound, not until it stopped, because then came a cracking noise, like its bones were breaking and readjusting. It then followed suit of Kyle, who was already in a power position, legs open, arms out, ready to fight. In the middle of everything, the wind kicked up. It was blowing in from behind us. It was so hard, dust and sand particles were in the air, which made it much harder to see. It came in so fast, I had to lower my head to try and keep the dust out of my face. That's when I saw it. In Kyle's left hand was the bottle of homemade alcohol. It had this disgusting hanky thing in it. It all happened so fast. His body dropped. His left hand went into the fire. The fire roared to life as some of the liquid splashed out of the bottle. The bottle, the hanky, and Kyle's hand were aflame. He threw that bottle with precision into the chest of the thing. With the wind blowing, it erupted into a ball of fire. There was a terrifying scream, like a woman, a big cat, and a few other animals mixed, screaming in pain and anger. The sound of this thing was so loud I had to put my hands on my ears to block the sound. All of a sudden I had the wind knocked out of me as Kyle had picked me up and thrown me on his shoulder. I was now being carried at a pace I'd never be able to keep up with, away from that thing, which I could still see. It was still screaming. The forest line was on fire. It was still on fire. We were tearing out of there so fast. Spencer had picked up Amber and was carrying her so that no one was left behind. Cheryl was waiting for us when we arrived back at the reservation's buildings. I was so terrified and crying. Cheryl grabbed a hold of me and was holding me tightly, asking for an explanation. When she saw that Kyle too was pale, she pulled us all into her friend's house. There, everyone told her what had happened. She had some doctor come immediately and cleanse us. It was an awkward situation for me, as I'm not very religious. We went back to the hotel, and I was having trouble sleeping. I was exhausted, but my eyes were fixed on the window. The next day was the big day for Kyle. When we got back to the reservation, we met the chief, who was quite nice. He apologized for our encounter the night before. He apologized to me, too, that one of his tribe would do something like that to me. Then the man went on to say that he had heard about everything that happened during the encounter. He said that the wind was a manifestation of Kyle's will to protect, that his heart had been tested twice that night. The first was a situation that many can lose their heads over, and even though he had struck the man, he calmed down after the situation had ended. The second was when it attacked us. The wind was a symbol of the world ready to feed the fire inside Kyle when he needed help. The chief then reached down and gently picked up Kyle's left hand. Surprisingly, there was no burn on it at all. We were in such a hurry and in such shock, none of us remembered to check. Then the chief took Kyle a few feet away and told him his spirit name. Later on, when we asked him what his spirit name was, he didn't say much more than, "It has something to do with a buffalo." So without missing a beat, Spencer blurted out, "Yeah, the big buffalo in wind. Be afraid." The name stuck. We still refer to him as that today. Unfortunately, not without a shiver, remembering that thing. Skinwalker in the Forest, from Travis. I'm 24 years old, and this happened 2 years ago. My pops and I have always loved camping, hunting, fishing, anything outdoors. Well, being from the lower parts of Arizona, we've always loved going up into the mountains. My pops and I planned a trip up to Sholo, Arizona, and around said areas. We packed our truck up with our camping and fishing gear and headed up there. It started out normal, fun kayaking out on the lake, throwing our poles in the water, letting the wind carry us across the lake. It was going great. We set up our tent and cot. I like to sleep under the stars when possible. We started a fire and had some dinner. But when the sun began to go down, I began to get an odd feeling that we were being watched. There was no apparent reason for it, so I ignored it, and I continued to talk with my pops. When we were settling down and getting ready for bed, I still felt as if we were being watched. Maybe it was all in my head, but either way, my nerves were on end. I went to bed no problem. When 2 o'clock rolled around, my feelings of being watched were worse. I should have listened to my senses. I sat up to go use the bathroom, after which I crawled back into my sleeping bag to try to go back to sleep. However, I began to hear coyotes. I didn't think much of it. There were coyotes out here, they were common, nothing out of the ordinary. I brought my Glock 19 and so did my pops. So we were also more than prepared to handle a few coyotes if need be. I began to drift off to the howling when all of a sudden, the coyotes began to go crazy. I opened my eyes and shined my flashlight in the direction of the howls. They sounded panicked, scared. It was a full moon that night, so it was easier to see. Plus, I had a high lumens flashlight, so I could see pretty far with it. I aimed it around, scanning the surroundings for the eye shines of the coyotes or movement, but I didn't see them. I calmed myself down, cramming myself back into my sleeping bag. Once again, I tried to get some sleep. Just as I was about to doze off, I felt hands on my sleeping bag. My dad was in his tent, so who in the world was running their hands along my sleeping bag? I began to reach for my pistol and flashlight when the hands suddenly stopped. They freaking stopped at the edge of my sleeping bag, gripping tight at the ends, as if they were ready to rip it off of me. I pretended to be asleep. I cracked my eyes just a little bit to see if I could see them. I did, and when I saw them, I nearly had a heart attack. I saw fingers, bony, long, and gray, with skin dried out. But the worst part was that what those fingers belonged to began to speak to me in my dad's voice. But I knew it wasn't my dad, because he was sound asleep, still snoring, not 6 feet from me. My body was screaming at me not to move, or I would be dead. This thing was trying to get me to move. It spoke to me in a distorted voice, a voice that only now barely resembled my dad's. "Travis, look at me. Travis, speak to me. Travis, now." It was getting angry. It was angry I wasn't responding to it. Right when I thought it was going to have itself a Travis burrito, my dad spoke up and asked if I was okay over there. He heard noises and popped his head out to check on me. I guess that thing ran off when it heard my dad. The next morning, my dad didn't ask me about the noises he heard last night. I mean, even if he had, I'd say it was probably me sleep-talking or raccoons. In any case, I was glad to be leaving the next morning, due to the fact I had to go back to work. I can honest to God say I was scared for my life. I've had similar experiences with creatures like it, and I believe this to have been a Skinwalker. In any case, if you do happen to go camping in Show Low, Arizona, bring a buddy or protection against forces that want to harm you, or you might end up being eaten. Skinwalker in the Woods. From KP. When my brothers, J and G, and I were kids, we would often go to my grandmother's. We never really minded being in the woods with her away from the city we grew up in, and often we'd have great adventures at Grandma's. When it was daytime, the woods and the surrounding 25 acres were a wonderland. But when night fell, we would find ourselves very afraid of the same woods we had just been playing in earlier. One night we had gone over to my grandma's. My little brother Jay and I were sitting on the porch when we noticed something very disturbing. Mind you, the house is surrounded by woods on 3 sides, and in the front was a huge cow pasture. As we sat talking, we noticed a pair of huge gold eyes watching us from the woods, and they had to have been at least 8 feet off the ground. We saw this, and we both ran inside crying. Grandma calmed us down, telling us not to worry. Nothing was going to get us. Well, she may have been wrong. The following day, we went out to the woods as happy as could be, not a care in the world, when we found a cave made of briar bushes. Now, anyone with sense knows briar bushes don't form in that way naturally, but being children, we started towards the cave-like structure, and we were soon hit with the awful smell of rot, decay, and vulture vomit. I only know how that smells after scaring a buzzard with my car, after which it vomited carrion all over my vehicle. My grandma had 3 dogs that would follow us all over the woods, but that day, my dog Molly refused to come with us. In fact, all 3 dogs seemed off that day. We go a little closer before I tell Jay we need to get the heck out of here. He agrees, and we turn to leave when I hear a branch snap. It had come from where we had just been standing. We don't turn around. We just run to the house and see Molly freaking out, barking and biting at the fence. She even growled at me, which was weird, because I'm the one who found Molly, and we had a great friendship. She actually bit me that day, as if she was trying to get me back inside the fence. I'm 30 years old now, and my grandma has long passed. My mom inherited the house and we go there every holiday. Even to this day at night, we sometimes see the yellow eyes staring back at us. It still makes me want to cry like a child. As a side note, my brothers and I are from the same family, but we were adopted. Our grandfather was a pure Cherokee Indian and medicine man. I wonder if it was a Wendigo or Skinwalker messing with us. That's Not a Deer, from Kelly F. I wrote in a couple of years ago a story about my encounter with the Skinwalker when I was a child. Well, I had another experience over 20 years later, and despite this happening in the winter of 2019, it's an update nonetheless. It was late, probably around 1 a.m. My best friend at the time, Stevie, realized she was out of smokes, and we don't smoke the same kind, so she convinced me to go out. It was freezing that night. It was the kind of night where there's no wind, but the chill in the air is so cold, you feel it in your bones. As my late Nana would say, it's raw outside, which I always thought described that kind of cold well. We hurried to my van and got in quickly. It didn't take long, as the store is only down the road. We were only gone for like 10 minutes. When we drove into my uncovered driveway, the headlights of my van lit up the piece of my backyard you can see through the mesh fence and into the right side of the yard, which goes back a ways, hits another mesh fence, and then goes into a small clearing, and then a tree line that leads into some woods. Basically, the entire right side of the yard was lit up from the headlights. We didn't get out of the car right away. That was just our routine. Smoke a cigarette while the van is still warm before we go in, but it didn't take long for Stevie to point out that we weren't alone. After I lit my cigarette, as I handed her the lighter, she asked, "What's that deer doing in your yard? Why is it just standing there? Is there something wrong with it?" I suddenly didn't feel the warmth of the van anymore, and my heart skipped a beat. I looked over into the yard, and standing in my headlights was the outline of what looked to be a deer at first. I didn't take my eyes off of it. I grabbed Stevie's arm and said, "That's not a deer. Get in the back and stay down." I must have sounded serious because she did as I said without hesitation. I looked at the figure, which did for the most part look like a deer. But as I looked longer, I knew something was wrong. The flesh looked necrotic. It was falling off, skin sliding off as it stood there, like it was rotting right before my eyes. The antlers were small, but they were covered in what looked like blood, and as I finally got to look at its face, it had a set of blue eyes that were human in shape. It had a mouth with lips, and it was smiling at me. That's when I realized it had to be the one I'd encountered before. It was smiling like it saw an old friend. I was frozen there for a moment. It was like time slowed down. I realized it knew me. I was only able to start moving because the thing began to mouth words, and that was the second time I ever noped the heck out of there, climbing into the back seat with Stevie. When I got in the back, she started to open her mouth, but I gave her the shh signal, and she stopped. After about 10 minutes of complete silence, I decided to take a look, which I wish I hadn't, or I wish I'd waited longer. Because when I took a look, that thing was trying to climb over the fence. It now had more human-like legs and arms with hooves, and a half-deer face. The deer skin had seemed to have fallen off completely by now, and it revealed new human-looking skin. Before I was able to duck down, it must have sensed me, because it looked back and we locked eyes one last time. It was still smiling, so I went back to hiding with Stevie. We probably waited almost 2 hours before we even looked up. When we did, the thing was gone, and I was able to turn off the headlights finally, and the van off completely. When we got back inside, Stevie wanted to know what the heck happened, so I told her the story from when I was a kid. Needless to say, her jaw dropped. She wanted to know so much more, but I told her talking about them would give them power. She went searching on her own, which I also advised against, but of course she didn't listen. We never really talked about it too much after that, and I lost touch with Stevie and moved April 2020. Since then, I haven't had anything like this happen again. I have dear friends, but they're real dear. It might have not been the same one, but the way it looked at me, I'll never forget that. Pray I don't run into it or another one again. If I do have another encounter, I'll be sure to come back, but let's hope that doesn't happen. I gotta say, I'm nervous to post this since I brought it up. Possible Skinwalker encounter. From Eddie. I live in southern Arizona, but I was raised in a pretty bad part of Texas. Gangs and drugs infected my city like a virus, so I learned to avoid people and to stay out of trouble for the most part. So, safe to say, it took a lot to scare me. When I got the chance to move with my grandmother in Arizona, I took it without any regrets. Now, this story took place on Halloween in 2018. I was walking my ex-girlfriend and her friend around the neighborhood because I had nothing else going on. I got dressed up and met up with them. We were walking around for about 2 hours or so, and my ex wanted me to take pictures of them, so she gave me her phone and I proceeded to do so. As I was done, I went through her phone, as at the time we were going through a rough time, and I didn't really trust her. As I was looking, I saw that she had been calling this random dude, and I'm not going to lie, I got upset. She told me not to talk to other girls, and I felt betrayed. I got mad and stormed off about 15 feet ahead of them, and as we were about 2 blocks from her friend's house, they accidentally dropped their candy. I stopped to wait for them, and as I was waiting, I hear my ex call my name. Eddie! It was her voice, but there was something off about it. I turned around. They were still picking up the candy, and I thought she wanted me to help, but it didn't look like she called my name, as she didn't really acknowledge me or anything. About 3 seconds later, I'm watching my ex pick up her candy, and I hear it again. Eddie! I look over to my left, and between these 2 houses is an alleyway of some sort. I saw a shadow moving behind this little alcove-type corner. I thought it was one of my friends that lived in the neighborhood, messing with me. I walked to the other side of the street to investigate, and as I step in the rocks, I see something peek around the corner. I stopped, dead in my tracks. What I saw staring back at me scared the living daylights out of me. It was around 7 feet tall, with yellow eyes, sharp teeth, Native American war paint on its face, and what appeared to be a dead wolf skin over its head. That wasn't even the worst part. As I took in the creature that was standing at least 3 yards in front of me, I felt a malicious intent coming from it, and all I could think was, oh my God. But I swear, I heard a reply in my head say, God can't save you. It felt as if it knew everything about me, probably things I didn't even know about me, I'm not trying to act tough, but I've had guns pulled on me, I've been robbed, almost drowned, and darn near broke my back at one point. What I'm getting at is I've had a few near-death experiences, but none of those got me near the amount of fear as I felt right then, that night. And it felt like years had gone by, but it was only several seconds. My ex and her friend were calling my name and I didn't notice. Finally, they both yelled my name, snapping me out of my trance. I looked back at them. They both said I looked like I saw a ghost. When I looked back at the thing, it was gone. I told the two of them to run and I took off running too, and I don't run for anything. Not until then. I was freaking out, about to have an anxiety attack. I was hyperventilating. I just couldn't think straight. Finally, they both snapped me out of it, and I told them what happened. It freaked out her friend pretty bad. I had to calm her down after. As we were waiting for my ex's mom to come and pick her up, I was sitting there, thinking about things. What it had said, God can't help you. I kept repeating it in my head. That night, as I lay in bed, I just kept thinking about it. I decided to browse some YouTube. I ended up coming across a certain channel talking about skinwalkers, and what I heard matched what I saw to a T. For the next week and a half, I couldn't eat or sleep. All I kept thinking about was hoping and praying to God that it wouldn't come back. Shortly after that experience, my ex and I broke up. I kind of repressed that memory because it involved her, and I really didn't want to think about it. But it kind of popped in my head randomly. Ever since then, I don't mess with the dark. I hate the dark. My grandmother can ask me a simple question to take the trash out, and if it's past sundown, I'm not going outside if I don't have protection, a light, my dog, anything, I don't care, but I'm not going out in the dark alone. The Skinchanger, from Just Some Native with Bar. My dad is from Browning, Montana, meaning we have quite a bit of Blackfeet and Cree Indian in us. I grew up with the old Native American stories, and I always thought they were true. I have experienced paranormal things in the past, but this was a whole new experience. We're currently living out of town, and no one is able to take us to the bus stop in the morning, so we go to work with my dad. Usually, we leave around 6 a.m. Me, my two sisters, and my dad get into our old res pickup. I sit in the front seat, so I have a pretty good view of the highway. I was staring out in front of the pickup, when suddenly, I see something running out in front of the truck. It almost looked like the Until Dawn Wendigo, but smaller in size. Its eyes had a scary glow to them. It ran across the road, then seemed as if it just disappeared with the wind. I looked over at my dad and said, "Did you see that?" He looked at me. "What was it?" I explained to him what I saw, and he said, "Don't talk about that anymore, okay?" I asked him what it was, and he said, "It's a skin changer. A shape shifter." As we were nearing town, I saw something sitting on the side of the road. My dad and one of my younger sisters saw it too. It was a bobcat, but it was huge, and its eyes had this eerie yellow glow. I looked at my dad, and he looked at me. We didn't say much after that. Another theory we had about the thing was that it was Nabi. Napi is from Blackfeet legends. In some stories, he is the creator. In others, he's a trickster. But in all these stories, he's a teacher and a shapeshifter. These Skinchangers or shapeshifters are from Blackfeet legends. The Navajo have their own version of this, the Skinwalker. A Skinchanger is a medicine man or woman who has reached enough power to be able to shapeshift into anything. Skinchangers are evil beings. They're a lot like the Skinwalker. My grandma always told me not to look out the window at night, and if I did, not to taunt any spirits. I was told not to say things like, "Come and get me," or "I'm not scared of you," because then it will come and get you.